All right, welcome to the GBNO show where we help you get better, not older. Episode 11 with yours truly. Hey, Dr. Rob, and my awesome wife, the dietitian Shannon.
Hi.
Okay, everything today, all with regard to intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating. It's been a big topic for, I don't know, I first started hearing about it in 2015, 2016. I'd say probably 2019, 2020 is when it started getting really big. So why don't we just jump into it? Why don't you just talk about what intermittent fasting is? You're going to be kind of the expert on this. I know a lot about it from a physiological standpoint. I've done it myself, still kind of do it, but I want you to talk about some specifics and we'll go from there and just educate everybody as much as we can on it. Benefits, negatives, etc.
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion between intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating. So intermittent fasting is a group of different types, different ways to fast. Time-restricted eating is one of those ways. So intermittent fasting as a whole is a big group, and then time-restricted eating is a subgroup of that.
Okay, so give me an example.
So intermittent fasting would be time-restricted eating. It would be things like a 5-2, where you eat for 5 days and you fast for 2. There is 2 days of fasting, 1 day off. There's all various ways that you could intermittent fast, some more restrictive than others, some with more health risks than others. Today, we're going to focus in on time-restricted eating and specifically talk about the health benefits for time-restricted eating, the limitations to how many hours you should be doing this, as well as some risks that are involved with time-restricted eating. The biggest difference between intermittent fasting, as like when we're talking about fasting for an entire day or pretty restrictive fasting, is that they're trying to get people into ketosis as a way to drive health benefits. Time-restricted eating isn't that way. Time-restricted eating is more about getting in line with your circadian rhythm, eating during the wakeful, hours of the day, and it being, you have to change it to what works for you. You can do 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours of a fast, and then that changes your eating window, of course, within a 24-hour period.
Gotcha.
I think the important thing to know is that time-restricted eating is a subset of intermittent fasting.
See, I think
it's a type of intermittent fasting.
Yeah, see, I think that's important to annotate here because, when I talk to patients about it, friends about it, people think that they're doing 16-8 as a time-restricted eating window, like not eating for 16 hours and then eating in an 8-hour window. They're doing intermittent fasting. And what you're saying is that's not truly intermittent fasting. That's a subset of intermittent fasting.
It's a type of intermittent fasting.
Okay.
Yeah, there's several different types of intermittent fasting, and that is one type of intermittent fasting.
Okay. What my research has told me on this, and when I started doing this, I started playing around with this. If you recall, back in 2016, 2017, I listened to a podcast with Dr. Rhonda Patrick, and she was really talking about it back then. And basically, the reason I was on board with it is it made sense. And you know how I am with my health. If it makes sense, I'm going to do it. And if I feel good, I'm going to do it. And I actually felt good, and I've been kind of doing a time-restricted eating window for quite a while now. But I was listening to her talk about it with this researcher. I think his name was Sachin Panda, and this is his main research area. And what they were showing was, again, the modern American diet and the modern American way of living, artificial light, being in offices, waking up in the morning in the dark, going home after work in the dark. We're not really doing what we're designed to do as hunter-gatherers, right? So really the cool thing about this is when you're in that window of not eating, you're giving your body a way to clean itself out.
That's right.
And that's kind of one of the most important things I found. And honestly, when people are talking about, well, there's all sorts of talk now about the microbiome, right, which is the gut bacteria we have inside our system, super important for regulating immune health, brain health, everything. Like we've talked before about how they've taken unhealthy rats and healthy rats and literally pulled poop out of the unhealthy one, pulled poop out of the healthy one. Yeah, Eric's over there laughing, but this is science. And they exchange the poop, which is basically what they do when they do a fecal transplant. And what they did was they took the unhealthy rat, gave it the poop of the healthy rat, and that rat became healthy. They did the same thing with obese rats and depressed rats. So the obese rats, they literally took the microbiome, they took the poop out, put it into the skinny rat, took out the skinny rat's poop, put it into the fat rat, and guess what? Fat became skinny, skinny became fat. It's wild how that controls everything. Now, one of the biggest things that really, if you want to get down the rabbit hole on it, is there's this thing called autophagy. And I don't know if you'd plan on talking about this at all, but one of the main things that the proponents of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating talk about is autophagy. Autophagy is your body's ability to look at cells that are maybe not functioning right and clearing them up. Yep. So it's cancer reduction. It's cleaning up the cells in the gut so you can actually help repair the gut at night when the gut is empty without food. The microbiome is actually the good bacteria are feeding on the inside of the gut and cleaning up the bad cells. And then what they're pooping out is vitamins and other good things that we need for, again, immune, and
it's an ecosystem.
It's a little ecosystem. So it's not just about losing weight. And of course, in a country where we have, a 60% rate of obesity, people are using it as a weight reduction tool. And it really wasn't designed for that. It was designed for health.
In addition to the autophagy subject, that just trickles down to improved metabolic health, that you see improvements in overall metabolic health, meaning the big hitters like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, etc. Mm-hmm. So that's important. This, goes hand in hand with the sleep, with the, autophagy, that whole cleanup process. When you are giving your body a chance to not have to digest, that's when it's in its cleanup mode. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're talking about here today.
Right, absolutely.
Do you want to talk about the personal stuff, or do you want to keep going on the benefits?
I used to suffer from a lot of reflux. Remember, I for years, I was taking PPIs on and off, which are proton pump inhibitors like Nexium and Prevacid and that sort of thing, which are not good to be on long term. And listening to this podcast, actually back in 2016, I had like a major aha moment where this Dr. Sachin Panda talked about how physiologically, the reason a lot of people get reflux at night and when they go to bed is because of some physiological mechanisms. So I'll explain this as cleanly as I can so I don't bore people. But when you eat food, your brain signals these little pumps in your stomach to release, they're called proton pumps, to release hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is this pool of really acidic stuff in your stomach that when the food hits it, it just starts to dissolve. And that's your first order of digestion is the salivary amylase in your mouth. But it's really your first like major form of breakdown in your gut. And then it goes down to your small intestine. Well, what happens is, when the sun goes down, your brain sees less light coming in through your eyes. So the pineal gland signals to the systems in your body that, hey, it's time to start getting ready for sleep. So what does it start to release? It starts to release melatonin. Well, melatonin is what helps you relax so you can fall asleep. Well, guess what melatonin does? It's inhibitory, or it tells the stomach not to pump the proton pumps to create hydrochloric acid. So you wonder why you have heartburn when you go to bed. If you're eating after dark, after 8, 9 o'clock, and you're eating chips, watching a football game or whatever else, you've got all this food sitting in your gut. You do always have a little hydrochloric acid in there, but when you're really eating at the right time, that's going to really propagate. You're going to get more of it. So because you have less of it, you've got this bolus of food sitting in your gut, it's splashing up. There's your heartburn. Now, the medical system, again, being this big symptom control mechanism, what do? Oh, take a Prevacid, take a Nexium, take a proton pump inhibitor.
And that destroys your microbiome.
So that's another one. Now, here's another interesting one. Everybody knows, well, not everybody, but people talk about insulin and insulin spikes and sugar. Well, insulin is released from an organ in your body called the pancreas. And basically that insulin is released from these cells called islet cells. Thank you. I couldn't pull that up. Well, guess what has an inhibitory effect on the islet cells? Melatonin. So now the melatonin, we know, tells the stomach not to digest, but it also tells the pancreas to not release insulin. What does insulin do when you intake glucose? Insulin is the key to open up the cell to put glucose in so you can metabolize it. So if there's no presence of insulin and you've got this extra glucose floating around, what's going to happen?
Well, you don't want your blood full of glucose. I assure you want it full of oxygen.
Exactly.
So it's causing metabolic issues.
So you're going to store more fat. You're going to have metabolic, you're going to have spikes. You're going to spike your blood sugar. And again, so we're going against what we're supposed to be doing. So the whole time-restricted eating window contributes to the natural way our bodies want to function.
Well, and I will say from my perspective in weight management, what I have seen is a lot of dysfunction in that, where people are backing their window too far into the evening.
Mm.
So they may be fasting until noon every day, but then because that gives them more time in the evening to eat later. And that's not metabolically the healthiest version of time-restricted eating.
Right.
Is it going to decrease the total number of calories that you're taking in? Yes. That's typically why it works for weight loss, is that it's typically removing one full meal a day, and typically people eat 2 full meals and a snack. And we'll talk about this a little later when we kind of talk about the risks, but you got to be educated on what you do within that window,
right,
to make sure that you are not making something that's healthy into something that's unhealthy.
Right.
So let's keep talking about some of the benefits.
Okay.
In addition to improved metabolic health, clearly weight loss and fat loss is one of them as well if it's done properly.
Yep.
Cardiovascular disease, there's shown improvement in lipid levels and triglycerides, which is really important.
And again, you talk about metabolic health. For people who don't know what metabolic health is, that's what's going on. It's the engine inside of your body. Is your engine functioning right? So, yeah, studies have been done on basically, people cleaning up their blood lipid panels.
By changing to time-restricted eating. In other words, they might eat the same way. However, just by changing the eating window to daylight hours and starting and stopping within a certain amount of time, we're seeing these. Now, there's 100 ways you can really mess that up and do it really improperly. But I would say most people who are interested in fasting tend to do it a healthier way.
Sure. So one of the studies that I found really cool was they basically it was that Dr. Sachin Panda again. I'll reference him a lot because he's like the guy who's researched this the most. I think he's out in San Diego or somewhere in California. They took a bunch of really unhealthy rats. They fed them an equivalent to whatever rats eat, whatever chow they give them, but they created a chow that was very similar to the typical American diet. Lots of crappy seed oils, lots of sugar-based food, that sort of thing. They fattened them up, and then they basically checked their lipid panel, and just everything was not good. Okay, so they got them borderline type 2 diabetic. They got them, again, we know the whole cholesterol thing is it's LDL is not like a major measure of health now, but what we talk about or what you talk about is like that ratio between triglycerides and HDL.
Yeah.
They got everything out of whack. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So I know people are going to listen to this and go, well, LDL is no longer a problem because of X research. I get that. We're just talking about there's other metabolic factors. So let's say for the reason of this explanation of this study, they pushed them to almost type 2 diabetes or just borderline. Or if you were a human, you'd be going to the doctor and the doctor would go, well, you might need to get on metformin for this, which is a blood sugar control drug. And then what they did for, I believe it was 2 months, you could double check that on me. All they did was go 12 hours. Okay. They started letting them eat at 7 in the morning, stopped them eating at 7 at night. Okay. And within, I think it was, I want to say 8 weeks, 6 weeks to 8 weeks, they had completely normalized their
just by changing that.
Just by change, they didn't even change their diet.
Yeah,
they just changed the window of when they were eating, and their blood lipids got better, and their diabetes went away. And then he added another thing, where he went, okay, well let's mimic what the average American does, and let's say they eat fairly well from Monday through Friday, and then let's give them the weekend just to eat whatever they want whenever they want.
Very typical.
Yeah, very typical. And they did that with the rats, and it didn't affect their outcomes.
As long as they stayed within that time restriction.
No. On the weekend, they let them eat whatever they want, whenever. But when Sunday night came, they shut it off at 7, and that week they went back to 12-12, eating for 12 hours, not eating for 12 hours. And they did that for several months where they let them gorge on the weekends, and it didn't change. So even doing some time-restricted eating with cheating, you're maintaining some good metabolic health there.
Yeah.
So that's a great benefit to it.
Yeah, I would love for our listeners to just focus most on being healthy in those eating hours, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But that is good data, that we have. And I think that's why pretty much everybody jumped on board. It's like, oh, you mean I get to eat however I want for 12 hours and it reverses my type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease?
Well, the point of the study was if you do the right thing, and again, he didn't even have them eating good food. This was the crappy American diet, but he did it in ways where they were just eating in a time-restricted window. That's all the experiment was. Now, when they gave them better food, of course, things got even way better. But the point is, if you're eating healthy most of the time and you're eating within a window and doing what your body wants you to do as far as, only eating at a certain time, sun goes down, stop eating, don't kill a bag of chips at 10 o'clock at night because you got the munchies.
A craving.
Basically, you can cheat, have some cheat meals on the weekend like we do. But the most of the time, do it right, and you can have a huge effect.
Yeah. Okay, so another improvement is brain health, which inflammation. It lowers systemic inflammation, so that makes sense that it would also affect brain health. So that's a good one. We've already touched on gut health. It's amazing when you get in synergy. Really, when you try to align what you're doing with how it used to be, where they got up with the sun and they stopped eating and, slowed down with the sun. And that's really what it's about, is trying to get your body, your physiology, everything in sync with daylight hours. So that's why I'm not a big fan of people. I find it more where men tend to push it more 16 to 18 hours, and then it shifts their window to after dark.
Yeah. Well, that's, I know you don't like that about me, but, I'm typically at the gym till 6:30 some nights, and then we get home, we do whatever, and then you've a lot of times eaten before me because you don't want to wait, but there's times I'm not finishing dinner till 8:30, but it works for me because I never have heartburn. I sleep right. Well, back to my original story back in 2016, my heartburn went away within a month. I never had issues with it. And I don't have issues now. I mean, periodically, if I eat some pizza and drink some beer on the weekend with friends, I'll get a little heartburn because it's crappy food. But almost never, 99% of the time I don't have it. But like last night, I mean, I worked worked with patients till 5:30, and then I worked out till 6:30. I didn't get home till 6:45. We did some stuff, and then
We worked.
we did the table talk,
Yeah.
right, for the community, and then I don't think I started making dinner and finished dinner until 8:30. But it doesn't seem to affect me. I wouldn't recommend that for everybody, but it works for me. And then typically, I don't eat till I'm done with my morning patients. So I just know what works for me. So I don't even count it. Like, what is that? Like, if I stop eating at 8:30 and then I don't eat anything till noon, what's the hour? What's that? 12. So I'm at like 15 and a half, 14, something like that. But it works for me.
16.
But there's days like, if you recall, yesterday morning, I'm usually up a little bit before you, but you came out and I was actually eating some yogurt and some nuts and a protein bar. And it's because I had a really good leg workout, did a bunch of deadlifts, and I woke up starving, and I just knew my body needed something because I had had a hard workout. So there's times that I will mess with it,
Yeah.
change up the time a little bit.
And I think that's when we get into some of the risks, when people are ignoring the cues from their body
Right.
for the need to nourish.
Okay, so let's play devil's advocate on that, because we know cortisol is an issue. Okay, cortisol is a stress hormone that spikes in the morning because it's basically your brain saying, hey, wake up. We got to get going, okay? But there's times, right, when women basically are intermittent fasting where they can have a negative cortisol effect, correct? So,
Yeah, so
can you speak to that?
Let's get into kind of what tends to be ideal for the different genders. So because of women's hormones, we tend to be less tolerant of longer periods. That seems like the sweet spot for women is as far as you want to push it is around 14. You want to start at 12 and see how I recommend everybody do 12.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody should just not eat for 12 hours a day.
Yeah. And you're really good at that. Like you're the most disciplined person I know when it comes to, like, if we're just chilling in the evening, you never eat anything after like 7:30.
Well, I think if you balance your meal properly, I mean, I'm not hungry.
Yeah.
I mean, and I feel like because I've balanced my meals properly throughout the day, I'm not having false sense of appetite and cravings.
Yeah.
Because of the way I eat and balance my meals.
That's been huge for me too. I mean, even when I was doing that kind of pseudo carnivore diet, I was always kind of, that's a podcast you should listen to, but my whole system was messed up. But now that you've got me doing like almost like a full avocado in every meal at dinner, I'm never hungry before we go to bed. I mean, it rarity, but I'll drink some ice water and it just kind of goes away. But
well, and I think too, we've really increased your fiber.
mm-hmm.
You've always eaten a lot of protein, but that layer of fiber as well as the good fat has really made a difference in triggering your system to say, hey, I'm good, I'm done, I'm satiated, stop eating. That
for sure
really worked for you.
So I read something recently about the hormone thing, getting back to that, how women's hormones tend to fluctuate a little bit more based on monthly cycles and other things, and guys tend to be quite a bit more consistent. So why don't you talk about that, like with regard to like the shorter window for women versus men?
Yeah, so like I said, 14 seems to be as much as you should push it. That's specific to women who are still having menstrual cycles and women who are still having babies, because it can start to make changes as far as your menstrual cycle for fertility, etc. if you are shortening your window so much that you're not nourishing properly. Mm-hmm. And then your body says, oh, well, if she's starving, then I can't let her get pregnant, and then that becomes an issue. Yeah. So for women, especially like when we still have our hormones, it seems to be that 14 hours is the sweet spot with data. After menopause, really women can do what they want to as far as listen to your body. I mean, if you feel good 15, 16, 17, 18 hours, then great. If you can still nourish properly and get everything in that you need to, specifically protein, because we don't want to fast and then lose muscle mass because of it, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to be careful what you're doing in that eating window to ensure that you're not compensating something else or taking away from something else, right? So that seems to be the reason for women to not go beyond the 14 hours when they still have their hormones. For men, it's a little less stringent for obvious reasons, but there are issues with testosterone if men do push it too far. So, and the same issues. Can they nourish properly? Can they get this, right amount of protein? All of the things within the window that they've created. So that's the biggest thing. You listen to your body. I would recommend everybody start at 12. See how you feel. There can be, when you're first changing it, there can be a settling in period where you're maybe feeling a bit wonky. It's maybe you're just trying to get your body used to something new. There's always that transitional phase. Most everybody starts to settle into what seems to work well for them. I personally do not do well with going beyond 12, 13 hours. I tend to get hypoglycemic, and that's just how I am wired.
Yeah.
So everybody really needs to listen to their body and see how they're feeling when they're doing it. Most importantly, let's talk about what are we doing within that eating window? Because if you have fasted, clearly nourishment is going to be super important. And I feel like too many people use the deficit in calories simply because they've missed a meal as a ticket to eat whatever they want. And you have to still, especially if you're keeping up with your health and you're building muscle, you have to be protein first. You have to get those 30 grams or less at each meal and make sure you're eating enough protein where you're not breaking down muscle as your form of it being in a calorie deficit. So I think that's super important to mention.
Yeah. Well, again, and I've talked to people before. One of my close friends, his brother eats one meal a day. He goes 20 hours and he eats one meal a day, and he likes it. But he's a little bit younger, but he does it because he can eat whatever he wants. And that may be a decent way to keep your weight down, but it's a really hard way to nourish yourself, and it's not very sustainable.
How old is he?
I want to say late 30s.
Okay.
Yeah, that would never work for me.
No, and I mean, doing that, and he thinks he feels great, but what is not good physiologically?
Well, that's what I mean.
What doesn't he know that he's doing? Because there's no way in one meal that you can nourish your body properly.
Right.
So.
All right, let's take a break from the podcast for a couple of questions from some people. So let's see what we got from Miss Shannon. Okay, Shannon, I've been seeing that freezing rice can reduce carbohydrates. Is that true? Is this a better option for those watching sugar and carbs?
Well, okay, so what she is talking about with this question is a resistant starch. So there are 5 different types of resistant starch. An R3 is what she's talking about, where you're taking a carbohydrate that has starches in it and you're cooling it, which changes the structure of the carbohydrate into a resistant starch just by that cooling process. And because of that, it resists digestion through the small intestine and then becomes like food for your microbiome. So there's resistant starches that are natural resistant starches, like let's say barley and oats and legumes are the most prevalent. So those resist digestion in the small intestine and end up being food for our microbiome, which is a good thing. Helps with the blood sugar control, insulin control. It's a good thing. Then you take something like potatoes, rice, pasta that are obviously normal carbohydrates to begin with, but by cooling them, by that cooling processes, changes the structure of it where it then turns into a resistant starch and your body doesn't break it down through the small intestine and it becomes like fertilizer for your microbiome. So,
Cool.
Yes, that does work. And there are Resistant starches, like green bananas are one that's a resistant starch. Plantains are one that are a resistant starch just by nature. Barley, oats, legumes, those by nature are resistant starches. Overnight oats, like raw oats, that type of thing. And then there is the cooking of certain starches that turned it into a resistant starch too. So the answer to your question is yes, that will help. By freezing the rice or cooling the rice before you eat it, it does turn it into a resistant starch. Good question.
Had no idea.
Oh, you just learned so much.
I do.
Okay.
Every day.
Hey, Dr. Rob. I have been hearing a lot about collagen. Will it help me recover from weight training?
Kind of, but not really. So when you weight train, and that soreness you get from weight training is actual, you're literally tearing the muscle fibers at a microscopic level. And what allows for the healing of that is you have satellite cells, which are these cells in the muscle fibers, and they basically signal for proteins to come in, and proteins will help secure the tear and make it grow bigger, and that's where you get muscle hypertrophy or muscle growth. That's more of a protein and amino acid thing. Now, we are not getting enough collagen in our diets. We're not chewing on bones and chewing on cartilage, not eating a lot of bone broths like we used to. So I still recommend everybody get some collagen, go to transparentlabs.com, use code Dr. Rob, you get 10% off. But basically you can get flavored or flavorless, and we both use flavorless. Well, you can't use it because it's from bovine. Or can you? No, you use fish.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Marine.
Yeah. So basically, I just put it. I don't drink coffee. I just put it in my tea every morning. I don't even know it's there. But there is some collagen constituency to muscle around the muscle, so you do need that. But to actually repair your muscle or recover from training, you just need protein. So depending on your weight, you need ample amounts of protein. If you're working out a lot, you probably need 1.5, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that's kind of the quick and skinny answer on that one.
All right, let's get back to the podcast.
So, the term metabolic flexibility, obviously.
Yeah. I'm not very metabolic.
No, you're not. You never have been.
Yeah.
Our oldest daughter isn't. Actually, neither our kids are.
Yeah.
I am pretty metabolically flexible.
So explain that. What does that mean?
Okay, so there's a couple of different sources of how your body creates energy, right? So when you drink some juice, which we wouldn't recommend very much, but it's just an example, or if you eat some fruit, you're breaking down the sugars, and then your body uses that as energy. It pulls that into your cells, and it's like putting gas into a car, basically. In the absence of glucose, sugar, you will start to pull from your fat stores. And that's really what being in ketosis is. And so metabolic flexibility is the ability to go, well, okay, the system hasn't had a lot of glucose, so I'm going to pull from the fat stores and my energy will be just fine. And that's where being in ketosis, for some people, they talk about like really being dialed in, like their brain is just really sharp when they're in ketosis, because ketones are a broken down form of fat that breaks down in the liver, and then your liver distributes it to your muscles and brains in the form of beta hydroxybutyrate and acetylacetate, and those substances cross the blood-brain barrier and they go into your muscles and they burn really clean. So you have that secondary source. So and that happened to me too. When I was going longer than 16-8 at the beginning, I think that's helped me in the long run. Like I could be with patients all morning, have somebody come in at noon, totally forget that I haven't had lunch. And then, at 3 o'clock, I'm going, yeah, why am I feeling a little hungry? Oh, I haven't eaten, but my brain is dialed in. I'm still good. So I think my body's used to getting into some fat stores and maybe flipping the ketosis switch. I don't know because I've never tested for it, but that's what makes sense to be
and I would say I don't
clinically. You do not
have that ability.
No.
I feel really yucky when my blood sugar gets low.
You start getting nauseated and the headache, and that's exactly it. And the headache comes from lack of blood glucose perfusion up into your brain, basically. So that's another benefit of it is, again, going back to the whole hunter-gatherer thing, you natives, even on in the US and Canada 200 years ago. It doesn't sound like a long time, but, before, well, maybe longer than that, but before, the Americas were settled, you had natives roaming all over the place, and they didn't have electricity. They just couldn't open up the fridge and pull out whatever to eat in the morning. They wake up, whatever beef jerky is left over from the buffalo kill or whatever. They were looking for berries, or, their bodies were not getting a consistent meal every 3 hours.
Well, so their physiology was adaptable, which is how we were meant to be.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's so the definition of being metabolically flexible is your metabolism is adaptable. It's adaptable to the situation you're in.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some risks with intermittent fasting, specifically time-restricted eating. Talked about briefly with women, and I'm going to read this because I'm less familiar with the phases. It's the luteal phase, where women tend to be less adaptive to fasting. In other words, it seems to really affect them during that time.
Well, describe what the luteal phase is.
It's when you're, I don't even know.
Well, you're releasing luteinizing hormone, and that's basically your, and again, I'm not an OB here. I'm just going back to like.
You took embryology.
Second year, yeah. Well, first year embryology and second year physiology. You're releasing luteinizing hormone, which is basically helping your hormones propagate, and then you're basically you're getting your body ready for pregnancy or
makes sense.
A period, basically. Yeah. This is why a lot of like high level athletes, like if we just had the Summer Olympics, if you look at a lot of these shredded women who run track, run distance, whatever, they often get what's called amenorrhea. They don't have their period, and that's because they're in such a highly trained state, and their body fat,
lean.
They're so lean, their body fat is so low, their bodies are going, we can't build a baby in here. So again, you have to be careful because you're pulling your body out of some of its basic physiological mechanisms.
So then let's think about that, as we know now that the luteal phase is prepping your body for pregnancy. Your body is not dumb enough to say, oh, let's let her get pregnant if there's not enough nourishment coming in during that time.
Right.
Our bodies are super intuitive.
Yeah. So if you're trying to get pregnant, you probably shouldn't be fasting
16,
18 hours. Yeah.
So that's specific. And then obviously that can affect fertility because of that. And then if you've got the male doing it where it's so much to the point where it's affecting his testosterone and other, libido, et cetera, there can be, you can take this way too far, which is the way it is for everything. So I think you have to be pretty in tune with knowing start at 12 and then work your way back and then stop where it feels best.
Right.
Keep in mind that you have to leave enough time in the day where you're still able to nourish your body properly, especially get the protein and all the nutrients that your body needs.
Do you remember back to, you don't remember dates like I do, but you remember back to like 2018 when I was fasting a lot, and I think I was in ketosis. I never tested myself, but now I walk around at 205 to 208. Back then I was walking around at 185 to 190. And I remember I got out of the shower and you were like, yeah, that look you're giving me right now.
Well, you didn't look good.
You were like, you look way too skinny. And I was like, really? I feel really good.
You can tell it in your face. Your color wasn't the right color.
But I got on the scale and I was like 176, which for me, I hadn't been below 180 since I was 20 or something like that.
Well, plus you still have a lot of muscle. So,
well, I was very lean and I felt good. But as soon as you said, I'm probably like any other dude who lifts weights, I probably got a little bit of body dysmorphic disorder. But when you told me I look skinny, you were like, you used to be kind of a big guy. And I was like, screw this. I'm eating.
That's your trigger.
Yeah. I went right back in the kitchen and
me skinny.
Chucked a couple bagels down the hatch, right?
Yeah. You didn't look healthy to me.
Yeah.
So that's why I did not like it. Your skin didn't look right. You your kind of eyes kind of got a little sunken in. And you can look back to pictures.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell when you were doing it.
And that was probably just a lack of fat in my face. Doesn't necessarily mean I was unhealthy, but I mean, when you see bodybuilders or people who are on stage, and the warrior aesthetic guys could talk about this, when bodybuilders or fighters are basically getting ready for a show and they're dehydrating themselves, you're a day away from death at that point. No, seriously, like it is not good for your body to not have body fat on it. I mean, you need the extra stores, right? So
at that point, that's all about aesthetics.
Yeah.
It's definitely not about health at that point.
Sure.
Yeah. And I know there are people that are into that. It's kind of the polar opposite of what I do.
But I'm just saying,
nourishing at a cellular
No,
level.
of course, absolutely. And I'm not trying to knock any of that. I mean,
No.
I'm jealous they can look that good, but and they will tell you, I mean, dieting down that way it's really hard on the system. And a lot of times it's a balance. Are they so lean that they're flat on stage? I know they talk about that a lot, where they don't have enough glycogen, which is the stored form of glucose in the muscle that attracts a little bit of water, so it makes them look like they got a little bit more volume. But again, I'm digressing. But
you are digressing big time.
Yeah,
here.
but the idea is, it's kind of what I was like. I was too lean, and it's not you.
Here's the other thing too. You were not eating enough.
That was the problem too, because I was going like 17, 18 hours and I was eating maybe 2 meals a day.
And still going to the gym. So you're, and you have a very physical job. There were a lot of reasons why that was not healthy for you.
Right. So again, we talk about wanting to be anabolic, right, which means in a positive state of muscle growth. I was probably catabolic. And also I was getting injured a lot.
Yeah.
I had a lot of tendon issues at the time, and my back was bothering me more. And was that because of the metabolic situation? I don't know.
Because you look skinny.
Yeah, that can't happen.
All right, let's get back. Okay, so other risks is that increased fatigue, mood, those type of things can be off. Mm-hmm. Mostly we see that in the first phases of when you first start to, try to fast, but then your body adapts. Sleep can be disrupted too, because of if you're trying to go too long, it can actually spike your cortisol and cause issues with sleep. So again, you can take this too far. Again, everything I think we always talk about is moderation and being mindful of what makes most practical sense. The bodybuilding that you're talking about, that's extreme.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, you got to call a spade there. That is extreme, specifically for a sport, specifically for aesthetics, and has nothing to do with nutrition and cellular health.
Right. So the bottom line is this. If you're going to do this, just like anything else, okay, if you want to run a marathon, you should probably get the whole couch to 5K program going. Do the whole run walk situation, okay? If you want to start, time restricted eating, don't say starting tomorrow I'm going to go 16 hours.
Right.
What you should probably do is maybe go 10 or 12 hours to start and then see how your body does. Now, here's the thing. If you go to bed at a normal hour, 10:30, 11 o'clock, 11:30, and you get up at 6:30 or 7, so you get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, guess what? You just fasted for 7 or 8 hours. So it's only another 4, right? Or 2. It's very easy.
I feel like I recommend for health reasons, and this is actually part of our Get Better Not Older health protocol, is fasting for 12 hours. Think about 7 to 7. I think that's realistic. It means stop eating at 7 and don't eat again until 7. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult, especially if you are balancing your meals properly.
Right.
And that meal of the last meal of the night, quite frankly, your first meal of the day is the one that matters most as far as cravings in the evening. So getting that 30 grams of protein and not spiking your blood sugar first thing in the morning, and, definitely getting the protein, spend the calories on good fats if you need them, berries as a low glycemic fruit to start your day, that's how there's tons of studies that show that mitigates to the equivalent of about 300 calories of snacking in the evening, just by getting that breakfast right. What do most people do? Cereals that are loaded with sugar or whatever, and it's the polar opposite. There's no protein in it, and they just spike their blood sugar, and then they're going to feel that throughout the day. They're going to have this perpetual false sense of hunger all day because they just started their day that way.
Yeah.
But every meal be protein forward, meaning get that 30 grams of protein or more, no less than the 30 grams of protein, and practice building your meals around that. And at night, really making sure that you're getting that good fat serving, because that helps you feel fuller, faster, for longer. It's satiating, which means it's going to just tell your body, hey, I'm done, I'm full. And that's important.
Yeah. And what I did and what I still do is, if I feel like, and it's not usually hunger. I mean, it's pretty rare that your stomach is growling, you know what I mean, 2 or 3 hours after a meal, because the average stomach emptying time is anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. So literally your food is sitting right here for 4 to 6 hours.
Well, it's mostly appetite.
Right.
And people don't take into account that your body, remember, this whole thing is about how intuitive your body is. And if you've not given your body what it needs, it's going to give you some appetite so you get out of the cave and go find what it needs, right? Yeah. And a lot of the time that can just be hydration. You know, it can give you false, because it's like, well, from the food, I will be able to deaminate some water from that and at least get some hydration. So your body is very smart, which is one of the reasons why I love what I do, because it's fascinating to these checks and balances that are in place throughout our entire body are pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to a few more risks.
Okay.
Hypoglycemia, I already mentioned that.
Hypoglycemia meaning what? Explain.
Where your blood sugar falls too low. So
you start feeling headachy and woozy, maybe even nauseated, can't think right.
Yeah. And the important thing there is, yes, get your blood sugar up, but you need to partner that with some protein and a little bit of fat so that it stays on board and keeps your blood sugar up. If you just eat a piece of candy or something to try to get your blood sugar up, it's going to go up and then it's going to come right back down. Yeah. So you have to be smart about that. The other thing is muscle loss and nutritional deficiencies, because that will happen if you are too restricted. And you are not giving your body what you need. So we've already talked about that at length, but you certainly don't want to start fasting and then your muscle mass be depleted because of it. If you can't eat enough protein to keep up with, the muscle that you're trying to build, what's the point of going and trying to build the muscle? Because you're not going to be able to do it if you don't have the right amount of protein. Okay. And then there can be some disordered eating patterns that can come, like it starts to get too restrictive and people kind of have some disordered eating around that. And then the other big one.
What's disordered eating? What do you mean?
Well, it's not necessarily an eating disorder, but just disordered eating where they start to feel kind of a little compulsive about stretching it further and further. It becomes unhealthy thoughts about and healthy patterns, if you will, on how they're eating.
I gotcha.
And then one other real big one. It can disrupt your gut microbiome because you're not feeding it what it needs, and therefore it disrupts it. And then finally, if you take medication that requires a very set pattern of taking this with food at certain times of the day, you're not probably a good candidate for time-restricted eating, if that's the case.
So the bottom line is, like anything else, be smart about it.
Yeah.
Right? Common sense.
And don't, you got to listen to your body, but you can't do it to the point where you're breaking down your body. That's not the point. There are a ton of health benefits that can come from it, but then you have to also be mindful of the risks involved.
Right.
So I think that's it. I think we covered everything.
Yeah. Okay. So quick synopsis. Okay. If you want to start time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting, try going that 12 to 12. Try having your dinner, being finished by 7:30. Don't eat again until the morning.
I think it's important to mention, because this particular type of intermittent fasting with time-restricted eating is specifically designed to be in synergy with circadian rhythms.
Yeah.
So I think people kind of miss this as the takeaway, and the reason it should be during the light hours. You should be eating in the morning when it's light, and you shouldn't be eating after dark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially now that we're heading into the winter months. If you do make a couple of mistakes because, we're heading into holiday season, it's fine. Just do the right thing the majority of the time. It's pretty simple.
And we're getting to the time of year where you're leaving in the dark and coming home in the dark. So it's near impossible thanks to, I'm just ready for this daylight savings stuff to go away. But anyway, so clearly there's just some part of the way we live, and, that's how it's just the way it is, because you're on your way home and it's dark and you haven't had a chance to eat. What I would say during those months is I would eat my bigger meals during the light of the day, and then save the smaller meals for the dark.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap up for today.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was waiting to see if you were going to wrap up.
No, you do that.
Takeaway: intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, pretty good for you. Don't be dumb about it. That's pretty good takeaway, right?
Remember, we had this conversation that you have a hard time stopping.
I can't say goodbye.
I know. So let's practice.
Let's do practice.
Let's just practice. We don't need to keep saying takeaway, and we don't just wrap it up. Okay?
Okay. So
do what we practice.
Okay. All right. Good session today. Wrapping it up for podcast number 11 of the GBNO show, the Get Better Not Older podcast, with yours truly, Dr. Rob.
And Shannon.
And again, remember, I am health and getting better, not older, from the outside in.
And I'm the inside out.
Until next time.
Get better, not older.